You know what I really appreciate about Marc Bergevin and the Montreal Canadiens? It's that we got clarity from him in the media the other day that he does not want to make any lateral moves. No moves for the sake of making a move. Don't trade a guy just because you want to go out there and say, hey, I made a trade. Don't do this, because unless you get yourselves an offer that blows the pants out of your waters, or whatever that saying is. I don't know what it is. My mind is just kind of coagulated with thoughts about the Canucks right now. You don't make that move. And so now we talk about Vancouver, because Vancouver, according to the rumors, according to the reports, according to the practice today, everybody is starting to freak out about JT Miller. Why? Because we had ourselves an article published on The Province here by Ben Kuzma. Take a look at this. Canuck JT Miller's time might be on the line amid wild interest. Now, okay, Lego, the interest for this guy is wild. Why is the adjective capitalized? No, it's not the wild adjective, it's wild as in the team. The Minnesota Wild reportedly want this player, and if you want to go ahead and read this article on The Province, go ahead. I will leave a link in the description so you can go ahead and give The Province your click. But the Wolves are always at the door when it becomes apparent an ailing club may be willing to trade a frontline player. At least one Wolf is sniffing around the Canucks' leading scorer. Now, I mean, okay, how do I go about this? Do I talk about the trade idea itself? Do I talk about my thoughts on that idea and the philosophy of a trade like this? Let's just go over the apparent rumor over here. It's not Besser in the trade crosshairs right now. It's actually JT Miller the Wild have called about. The Wolves, I don't know why it says the Wolves. Are the Wild Wolves, or is Wolves just a replacement for the team that is looking to strike at the Canucks and do this thing? The Wolves are always at the door and sensing that a wounded club may be willing to part with a frontline player if the return is right. And with the hockey operations department in turmoil as ownership ponders its next step, a trade might be the logical means to send a message. Okay, moving on. In a Miller acquisition, the Wild would likely dangle winger Kevin Fiala, 25 years old, who has had ample opportunity to score, but has just 3 goals despite 58 shots, which speaks to his minuscule 5.1 shooting percentage. He's also in the final year of a contract that carries a $5.1 million salary cap AAV hit. Now, that's not a trade that is going to be on the block or that's solidified to happening or whatever. This is just Kuzma saying, yeah, okay, so the Wild have called about Miller and the Canucks, and if they were to make a trade for Miller, they likely would send over a guy like Kevin Fiala, for example. The rest of the article goes over a few other things, but I wanted to focus mostly on this trade idea itself because things had gotten kind of out of hand. Why? Well, because today we had ourselves the Vancouver Canucks practice in Pittsburgh, which did not include JT Miller. Now, a lot of people were quick to point out, okay, maybe this is just a maintenance day. Maybe it's just a rest day for the guy. You know, he's been busy. He's really putting the team on his shoulders when it comes to scoring points because he's got 19 points in 19 games played. How the hell is anybody on this dog water Canucks squad at a point-per-game pace? Ask and you shall receive. JT Miller is right there, 19 points, 19 games, so good for him. But you take a look at how exactly the practices have gone down. The fact that he's not in the lineup right now is concerning, for lack of a better word, for some Canucks fans. And you have the idea pondering itself around the fan base as to whether or not a trade could be in the mix. We had ourselves Rick Dhaliwal interviewing the agent of JT Miller, who said this: "We have not had any conversations with the Canucks about anything involving trades. JT is focused on righting the ship there." Now, okay, I'm going to take that at face value and say that there's probably not going to be a Canucks trade that we are aware of at the moment, but of course things can change with the flick of a switch. All of a sudden, if there's a prospect dangled or a right-handed defenseman dangled, if JT Miller gets traded to the Minnesota Wild, because he's the Canucks' best player on paper in terms of the point production right now, the Canucks cannot afford to lose a kind of trade like this. You cannot afford to let this go without getting a top prospect like a Matt Boldy or a, dare I freaking say, Marco Rossi, but I know nobody in Minnesota is going to be willing to part with that. Or even a right-handed defenseman. Kalen Addison is the one that comes to my mind. But if you were to make a trade, obviously, there's no way the Minnesota Wild are going to be willing to part with any of those assets. Those are the untouchables in their sphere, I would say. But JT Miller provides so much value that you almost kind of need to default to this guy if you even entertain the idea of the Vancouver Canucks selling and acquiring younger assets to build for the future. And I hate that I'm saying that right now, because Benning has been building for the future for 8 gosh darn years, and we're still in this kind of competition. So, if you trade Miller, who is indeed, like, he's 28 years old. He's not old. Like, he's still sort of young, right? If you trade this guy in a package for another player like Kevin freaking Fiala, who is 25 years old, but he's got 1 year left at $5.1 million, this is the most lateral move out of lateral moves that you could even entertain. Fiala's got 12 points in 18 games played this season. He had 40 and 50 last year and 20 goals last year too. He's noted for his just absolutely prime wrist shot ability. He can wrist it from anywhere, and usually it goes in, especially against Vancouver, but Kevin Fiala is as effective, if not less effective, than JT Miller is on the ice right now. This kind of trade screams to me, if you trade away Miller for another complimentary replacement-level scorer, you're just trying to make a move for the sake of making a move. It's the complete opposite of Marc Bergevin going out there and saying, yeah, I'm not going to make a trade for a replacement-level player. Miller for Fiala would be even worse. Unless you acquire another guy like a Boldy or a Calen Addison or a prospect that is of value, or a draft pick as well, I would not see a Miller for Fiala trade even being close to worth it for the Vancouver Canucks, especially if it's 1-for-1. You're disrespecting JT Miller and the amount of production he can put up this season with a trade like this. Not that Kevin Fiala is bad, it's just they're separated by only 3 years, Miller produces more, and Miller has an extra year on his contract at $5.25 million. Fiala is making 5.1. He expires at the end of this year. And if you're going to go out there and try to make the argument, oh, I'd rather have Fiala than Miller, contractually, Miller has the edge. Production-wise, Miller has the edge. Position-wise, I mean, they're the same position. They can both play all 3 forward positions. Fiala, you could just argue, has a better, more lethal and deceptive wrist shot than Miller does. Miller's the more valuable player here. They're only separated by 3 years. It's not like he's a dinosaur out here. Like, if you really believe that the best of Kevin Fiala is yet to come and he's got, I don't know, point per game potential in the future. He was at 40 points in 50 games last year. Let's say you go out there and you say, all right, I think this guy is a legit 35 goal and 85 point producer in the future. Then okay, be my guest. Let me know in the comments if that's your thought process over here, but Miller is all that and maybe just a bit more for a longer amount of term too, and they're making the same AAV. Kevin Fiala is going to get re-signed at a much higher dollar amount when this offseason commences, isn't he? The Vancouver Canucks would be foolish to do something like this if it's 1-for-1, unless, again, there's a Boldy or an Addison or something included, that in which the Minnesota Wild would likely not be willing to part away with. So, if JT Miller gets traded, my point is this: make the right gosh darn trade. Do not do a trade just for the sake of making a trade, and get a replacement level player that can contribute arguably the same amount of success towards this Canucks season today and in the future as well. 3 extra years of youth for Fiala on Miller is not enough for me to say, yeah, this is the better move long term. We've got Petey and Besser and Hughes signed at X amount of dollars, and JT Miller, oh, sorry man, he's 28 years old. We gotta trade him for a guy who's 25, who produces less and who makes a little bit more on a shorter amount of time. Like, does that not strike a chord with anybody else who is a Vancouver Canucks fan? Even Minnesota fans, at least acknowledge that my point makes sense. You guys are super concerned about trading Fiala anyway because you don't know if he's going to stick around with your team. That if Miller is the guy that goes, like, okay, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way it goes down, because Jim Benning is Jim freaking Benning, and the guy is known for making lateral moves that don't really do anything in the long term. He's so focused on building the now that now if you're dangling away JT Miller and thinking that you're going to improve the team like that, like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. He's the top scorer on the team. Like, you need to get a haul for this guy, and you cannot make a trade with the idea of making the team better because you're not going to win. Like, unless you trade away Miller for a McDavid, which is not going to happen, this team's not getting any better with a Miller trade. So if you're a Canucks fan, let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on all of this stuff. Do you agree with me? Do you think we probably shouldn't trade Miller in a trade that addresses the now rather than a trade that addresses the future. If it's a future trade, then okay, go nuts. Get first, get prospects, get all this stuff. Commit to another rebuild. Be my guest. But a replacement level trade for a replacement level player for a team that is suffering in the now, and a guy who's only got 1 year left in Kevin Fiala, dude. If that's the case, then please let me know in the comments all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this with Rosén 99. And bye.